Okay, welcome to Power Pivots, the podcast where we explore the stories behind the fundamental career shifts and changes that have made all the difference. I'm your host. I go by Hatu, and today we are joined by
Leslie Zepeda.
Okay, welcome Leslie. Welcome.
Thanks for
Of
having me, Hatu. I'm excited to be
I'm
here.
excited to have you too. I'm excited to have you. Let's get it started. So, I always like to ask people in the very beginning what their PowerPoints are. So, PowerPoints, I like to think of them as who you are. So, three core fundamental words or phrases that you would use to describe yourself. So, for you, Leslie, what would you say your PowerPoints are?
So I would say that I'm a lot of things, but I think that in the context of career, there's three that I think about, and they are creative, curious, and
Oh,
courageous.
three C's. Okay. There's the marketing
Yeah, you
coming
see what I did
in.
there?
The marketing. Okay. Well, you want to expound on them? Tell us a little bit more as to why and how you came up with such a clever way to do it, too.
Yeah. I'll tell you the whole thing. So I'm definitely a creative at heart. It's something that's been in me since I was little. Like going back to like when I was like, I don't know, like maybe in fourth grade, I would draw a lot and I would draw fashion designs. And interestingly now, like I work in fashion, it kind of didn't start that way, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So that's creativity. It's something that just drives me in general, both in both my personal and professional work. And then curious, I think that that's something that's just like very innate to me. Whenever I meet someone, one of my questions whenever we're talking about something is always like, well, why did you do that? Or what does that make you feel? And I'm just always very curious and trying to understand why people do things. Again, I think that that also speaks to why I ended up in marketing because I'm really curious to understand how the consumer thinks. And I'm always looking to learn more and improve myself. So yeah, and then the last one I was really struggling with it, and I caught on that the first two started with the
Ah.
letter C, and so I was like, let me think of the
Yeah,
last
you
one.
got it. Nailed it.
and so I was leaning towards persistent, resilient, just kind of like thinking through my journey. And I thought, you know what, like courageous is actually like a better word because I think that it takes a lot of courage to move past your fears and go after what it is that you're really passionate about. And that's been a big part of my story. Again, both personally and professionally.
Awesome. Wow. Tied it up with a bow so neatly. Very much so. Three C's. I get it. I'm here for it. So they always say that the story is told in hindsight, and hindsight is 2020. So tell us a little bit more about you. Tell us your hindsight story. Who makes you who you are, Leslie?
Yeah, so I'll talk about my personal life because I think that it is very much a part of my career story and path. So my family is Guatemalan. My parents came to the U.S. They were super young, and my dad went on to he went to trade school in L.A. He didn't know English. Him and my mom. He graduated from university and he was an educator back in Guatemala. And then my mom only went to sixth grade, and then after that, she didn't continue her education. So my mom was a housekeeper my whole life, and so she also stayed home for about 10 years taking care of us. And then my dad went on to trade school and became an engineer, and so it was always like a really big part of my life growing up. I'm the eldest of three. That education was everything, and so my dad really pushed us because he had come to the U.S. without any knowledge of the culture, the language. He was able to make something of himself. So he would tell us, you have no excuse. You have everything that you need. You have a family that supports you. Language, so like go out there and pursue your dreams and go
Sounds
big.
very similar to mine. Yeah.
Yeah. There was no
Yep.
excuses
Exactly.
whatsoever.
Exactly.
Yeah. So going into professional. So I grew up in Southie, which is a city in Southeast LA. And then I went on to UCLA. I was the first in my family to go to a four-year
Go Bruins.
university. And then I graduated. Yeah, the Bruins. And then going into UCLA, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think that it was like up until that point, that had always been the dream, right? Like get into UCLA, and like after that, I didn't really have a plan. Like that's like straight up the truth. And so I kind of like I was really young, and I didn't really think things through, and so I didn't really pick on a career. Like I didn't really choose a career path when I was in undergrad. I just kind of ended up taking a lot of courses in Spanish because I was really passionate about the literature. And then as I was getting closer to graduation, I thought, well, maybe I could go into like communications and go work for like one of the Latino Spanish networks. So that was kind of like where my head was at going into graduation. And so I graduated with a degree in Spanish. And then I didn't have a plan. I didn't have like this like plan to like go and, interview. I didn't have like a playbook or anything like that. And I didn't know anyone who had done anything similar to what I had done, which is at that point was just like, graduating from a 4-year university. And so I started interviewing with a couple of companies. So I interviewed with Telemundo. That didn't go too well. I wasn't like prepared or anything like that. And going back to the story about my mom being a housekeeper, so she used to work with this woman who had graduated from UCLA. So she was also a Bruin. And my sister and I would take care of her kids. And so one day she's like, "Hey Leslie, like what's up? Like you just graduated. What's next?" And I was like, like I'm actually like looking and to give you some context, I graduated in '08, so into a recession. So it was just like a weird time. And so she mentioned that she was the HR manager at a corporate law firm and that she could get me an interview. And so, she could refer me and get me an interview for an admin role. And I didn't really have a plan. So I thought, you know what, like this could be a really good opportunity. I don't really know anything about corporate law, but I'm super curious. So like, let me just like learn and see what it's about. So I ended up interviewing and I got the role as an admin assistant. And I quickly like networked my way into the business development department, which is kind of like, they call it internally business development, but really it's legal marketing. So it's very different from like what I'm doing now, which is like consumer retail marketing. But then I was there for 8 years. And so I had like, been promoted a few times, which is like really great. And each time I was like learning more and more about like mergers and acquisitions, leverage buyouts, finance, like a bunch of different industries. And I think that's when I started thinking about, I've always been really fascinated by business and I didn't really know what to do, like with my degree and my experience. And so then I started just like researching on Google and talking to people. And I found out about the MBA and business schools. But at the time, I was also trying to break into tech. And I didn't have any experiences when like tech was really booming. And I felt like corporate law was a bit slow for like my preference. I wanted something a bit more fast paced. So I went into sales at a cloud tech software company. And that was interesting. I learned a lot about just how tech startups work. And then I also learned a lot about sales and how the team works with marketing and how they go hand in hand. But then the company had gone bankrupt. So they laid me off. And then at the time, I had already decided to go to business school. And I was in the middle of like filling out my application and all that stuff. And then I thought, well, do I just go and try to find another role, another sales role at another tech company? Or do I try to do something to better position me, one, to get into business school and then to make that pivot post-business school? So I took the risk and I launched an e-commerce fashion business with my sister. And so did that and then got into business school the following year. And then post-business school, I ended up at Amazon. So I've been there since graduation. So we graduated in 2020 and my role has changed since I joined quite a bit, but now I lead global marketing for our flagship brand, which is Amazon Essentials.
Nice. Awesome. And what I love about this story is that you've pivoted quite a few times, right? And it seems like it's just been crucial and like made quite a big difference. So I guess for all of them, or maybe you think the most critical one, why don't you just talk me through a little bit of like how you did it, why you did it, and what the particulars of that pivot were?
Yeah. So I think from like the very beginning, like starting at Latham, the corporate law firm that I was at, and then transitioning within the company, every time that I pivoted, I did it through referrals, like internally, like talking to people, learning about the roles, understanding how to position myself. And then I did that again when I went into sales and just kind of like tying my story together and helping the recruiter or the hiring manager understand why it made sense, right? And why I wanted to transition. And then I think from tech into fashion, that was a little bit more, it was a bigger risk. I didn't really expect my business to take off. It was kind of more of like, let me just try it out, see how it goes, learn a little bit about business and entrepreneurship. And it didn't really require me getting buy-in from anyone, right? I think what it did require was me being scrappy and me just looking things up, right? And trying to figure out, how do I set up a Shopify store? How do I go and buy products? How do I, position it? How do I market it? How do I shoot it? Where do I get a model? This is like all just like straight up just being scrappy. And then I think that my story did kind of make sense going into business school because I was able to demonstrate, that I did have an interest in business. And ultimately, there was a similar thread throughout where it was marketing and sales and how those two go hand in hand. And then the last pivot that I made, which was getting into marketing at Amazon and specifically within fashion, I think having launched my fashion business, I think that that kind of made me
Yeah.
stand out. I think had it not been for that, which I didn't plan for it. I didn't plan to go into fashion post
Yeah.
business school. If I hadn't done that, I think I would have had a little bit of a harder
Yeah.
time.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think there are two things that you said there that are absolutely essential. I just wanted to highlight, right? Just number one, stepping out on faith, right? Pivoting is not easy. I think that sometimes folks gloss over it, and it seems like it is. It's not easy. There is a certain amount of risk appetite that is necessary to do it, but it sounds like it makes a huge difference, right? And as you're doing that, like being able to tie those threads for folks like me who are looking at it on the other side, right? Or the hiring managers trying to understand a little bit more about your story is extremely important too. Because, if I just because I see that, oh, you've done X, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the skill set that I need. Or just because I see that you have not done X doesn't mean that you don't have the skill set that's necessary, right? But being able to tie
Mm-hmm.
the common thread for people and they're like, light bulb, I get it. I think that's something that obviously you have seen great success with throughout your career.
100%. I think that it wasn't until I did a little bit before business school because obviously, like when you're applying and submitting your application and going through interviews, you kind of have to tell
Mm-hmm.
that story. But I think business school prepares even more, right, to like learn how to tell your story and your elevator pitch and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. And so it wasn't until I was at interviewing for Amazon that I realized like, oh, all of this makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Like I went from corporate law into sales at tech, marketing and sales work hand in hand, but I wanted to be somewhere more fast paced. So I think it's more so about like helping the person across the table understand why you made the
Yeah.
change. Like it doesn't have to be perfect, but there has to be some thoughtfulness put into like why are you making this change? Why are you seeking to
Right.
pivot? And there has to be some sort of connection. And so each time I was able to say, I want to go into sales and tech because I want to be in a more fast paced industry and marketing and sales go
Mm-hmm.
hand in hand. And then I did that again when I went from business school to Amazon, where it was more about, I had all this experience prior to, but I'm really passionate about consumer
Mm-hmm.
products. And so now, having gone to business school and having launched my own fashion business, this just makes sense because it's a next step for
Yeah.
me, right? Like I've already amassed all these different types of experiences and this role has all of that
Yeah.
combined. And so there's different ways that you can do it. It's just about helping the person across the table understand why it is that you want to make
For
that
sure,
change.
for sure. And the cool thing about this is a lot of times, or actually almost always, the story is, like I said, told in hindsight, right? So sometimes it feels like you're just going with the current, just going with the flow of what's happening. But if you take some time to reflect, look back, you've made certain decisions or done certain things because of a certain reason, right? So being able to, as you're making the linkages for folks, make it seem like it was planned out or like there was some rhyme or reason behind why you did it makes a more cohesive story. I'm serious. Like at the
Right.
end of the day, like if you tell me this beautiful tale of like exactly how your career allegedly went, then it sounds all well and good. But you're not talking about the days that you're crying yourself to sleep or like, eating at your desk for days on end. Like those kind of things are coming out. So yeah, that hindsight
Right.
story, knowing how to tell that hindsight story is so, so important and so critical. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that the way that you phrase it is so perfect because and that's something that we do in marketing, right? It's like who's your audience and what's the story that you
mhm,
want to tell. Like that's essentially
yeah,
what you're doing. And it doesn't always have to be perfect as like you're going through it and it's I think like once you reach that pivotal moment where you have to kind of figure out how to tell the story that you just have to craft it in a way where it makes sense. So
yeah.
yeah, 100%. A lot of this
Yeah.
was not planned.
Listen, I'm with it. I'm with it. I love those stories. I love those stories. Has Power Pivots inspired you to reevaluate your career path? If so, look into Power Pivots Career Coaching. Whether you're interested in career discovery, job description dissection, or interview prep, I take a tailored approach to helping you understand your ultimate career goals and get closer to them. Interested? Fill out the interest form at the bottom of the show notes for your free 30-minute consultation. For any questions, email hatu@powerpivots.co. That's HATU@powerpivots.co. As always, pivot powerfully. So you've touched on this a little bit, and I have gathered a few of them, but I want to know a little bit more about the resources that you used in the process of making these pivots. It sounds like network was a big part of it. It sounds like school was a big part of it as well. But just tell me a little bit more of, like, from a resource standpoint, the things that you did that you think were really helpful in making these career shifts and changes.
So I would say network is probably number one. I think every time that I have made a pivot, it's been due to my network. So the first one, my mom was my network. She was the one that connected me to her manager. After that, I worked with an agency, a recruiting agency, to get into tech. And then after that, when I launched my business, it was with my sister, and she had, she had been working in this space, and so she was essentially my network. And then business school was an interesting one because I was actually waitlisted. So I reached out to the Michigan Network and Consortium. Consortium was a big resource for me, and I was able to connect with students at the university who were there and ask them essentially to help me build my case with administration. And it was thanks to that network that, I got really lucky, and I was able to get in. And then the last pivot that I made into Amazon, one of my best friends was working at Amazon. She was part of the Latino ERG, and the person who went on to be my manager, he was the one looking to fill the role. And so she's the reason I got that referral. So that's a huge one. Another one that I think for me was super important, and I don't know that a lot of people talk about these things. I'm super open, so I'm going to talk about it. So I have dealt with and struggled with anxiety for many, many, many years now. I get very, very nervous with a lot of different things, including public speaking and this podcast, things like that. But I also had anxiety when it came to standardized tests. That's something that I think a lot of people don't talk about. And when I was taking the GMAT, I'll talk a little bit about my experience, but I had scheduled my exam, and I scheduled it multiple times and would cancel it again because this fear, it just kind of paralyzed me. And then I had gotten to a place where my score was pretty high, and my tests and stuff like that I was taking, my practice tests. And then when I took the test, it was just I failed miserably. And then I talked to other people who had had that same experience where, you walk out and you're just what just happened? I just blanked out. And what I started seeing was that other people who had experienced that were also being paralyzed by this anxiety. And so then somebody mentioned to me, why don't you get accommodations? And I just didn't really know what that looked like or what it meant. Did it mean that I just wasn't smart enough and things like that, and not at all. I think anxiety is it's real, and it's, that does require accommodations. So I saw a doctor and I was able to get accommodations, and then I was able to get the score that I needed, and it just made all the difference for me. So that was, I think, exploring things like that. Don't be afraid, because that is why those resources are there, right? And things like anxiety and other, mental conditions that require accommodations, I think you should absolutely look into those. That was another one. And then as far as resources, professional ones, I think once I knew that I wanted to go into marketing, there's a product marketing, I think it's called Product Marketing Alliance. But there's all these different, tools like that. You just Google it, and there's so many things that come up specific for the function that you're interested in. And so that was something that I leveraged a lot to understand, what does product marketing look like? What is the job, right? What is it when you've never done it before? What is it? So that's something that I leverage currently in my role. I do the exact same thing, Googling, right? If I don't understand what a certain marketing term means, or if there's something new that's up and coming, I just Google it and I find different resources. So MarTech is one of the ones that I came across recently. I use another one called WGSN a lot for marketing forecasting and insights. Those are pretty much the big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But I think in general, just researching, and talking to people and asking around.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, number one, thank you for being very open about your experience and your story. I'm sure that's very helpful, and you're not alone in that realm, right? But you've said a lot of great things here. One of the things that I really wanted to circle in on is your definition or usage of network, right? I think a lot of times when people talk about network, it seems like some kind of formal, like very stodgy kind of thing, right? Where it's like, oh, I have to like be on LinkedIn, or oh, exchanging business cards, or have to be through email. But I think from your experience early on, it was shown that your network is basically literally anybody that you know, right? So it just kind of
Right.
depends on what the time and place is and how it fits in from, your mom and the lady that your mom worked for, and then your friend, right? And then even friends talking you through the GMAT experience, and things like that. So that that resource, I think, is heavily underutilized because of how people think of networks and how they like frame it.
Yeah, and I can relate. Like, I'm terrified to like cold outreach to people,
Hmm.
and I'll still do it because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah.
And it's so crazy, right? Like we're grown ass adults, and it's still scary to like reach out to
Hmm.
someone that you've never spoken to. But I think that the bigger theme for me has been that if people don't know what you
Hmm.
want, then like how can they help?
Correct.
So it's more about vocalizing, like your experience, like even being
Hmm.
vulnerable, right? And saying like I struggle with like
Hmm.
standardized tests. I get really nervous. I sweat like a crazy person, and then like things like that, or saying like I want to be a marketer, but I don't know what marketing and fashion
Hmm.
looks like. Who can I talk? Like just talking about those things to the people around you can help, because if they don't know what it is that you want or what you're dealing with, and how do they know how to help, right? And so I think that's been my biggest learning: sharing more and being vulnerable and
Yeah,
asking for
no,
help.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then obviously we went to school together, we went to business school together. Go blue. Would you say, from the standpoint of where you are in your career now, that business school was a helpful vehicle?
Yeah, 100%. I think that for me, because I had a non-traditional background, right? Like I had a degree in Spanish, I worked in corporate law, in legal marketing, which people don't really know what that
Hmm.
is. And I wanted to pivot into tech from like a marketing perspective. And I think that without business school, I wouldn't have been able to pivot as
Okay.
quickly. Like I probably could have worked my way there somehow, and it would have taken a really long time. But I think that the MBA kind of gave me the credibility that I needed and the business acumen to be able to make that transition. I think that without it, I wouldn't have been able to make the transition as
Yeah, that's
quickly.
that's a huge highlight. That's a huge highlight. I think when people talk about ROI, the time that you use to do it is a big thing. Not just necessarily the cost, right? Or like what the goal is, but like how quickly you're able to do it. Yeah, you may be able to get to the same goal eventually, but if you want to kind of get that validation or get that signaling that comes from school, I definitely think that makes a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah, I
Cool.
agree.
Awesome. So for you, what advice would you give yourself? What advice would you say, let's say from a pre-pivot standpoint and a post-pivot standpoint? What advice would you say that you would give?
Yeah, so pre pivot, I would have pivoted
Mm.
sooner. I think that fear is something that got in the way for
Hmm.
me. That the 8 years that I was in legal marketing, I think like my experience was great. I was learning a lot, but it wasn't something that I was passionate
Hmm.
about. Like I didn't love corporate law. I wasn't a
Yeah.
lawyer. And as someone who is very creative, like I really thrive in creative spaces. And so, I don't regret anything, because I think that my story is my
Hmm.
story. But I think that if I had been courageous to pivot sooner, then I probably would have gotten to where I am
Okay.
sooner. So that's what I would say. Don't be afraid and go after what you want. Don't let fear
Okay.
hold you back.
Okay. And then what about from a post standpoint?
So post, I would say don't feel like you have to stay your
Hmm.
course, right? Like I think something that, having done that, right, and now being on the other side where like I'm in a space that I'm like really passionate about, but I also have many other
Hmm.
interests. Like I love interior design, I love food and beverage, I love beauty. I have so many interests, right? And so just because like I work in fashion now doesn't mean that I have to stay in
Right.
fashion. Like I can go and explore all these other things. And so I think again, like same idea. Like, don't be afraid to try things. And I think for me, it's more about like, okay, like, is this really what I want? Do I want to stay in fashion, or should I go and try these
Yeah.
other things? So I think if you have a like a clear understanding of what it is that you want, then great.
Hmm.
Like, continue what it is that you're doing, and keep talking to people. But if you don't know, then keep
Yeah.
exploring. Keep exploring, because
Yeah.
why not?
No, absolutely. And, in this day and age, a lot of what we're doing in jobs is gathering skill sets for your toolkit, right? And once you feel like you've gathered them and want to move on to something else, people are having five, six different jobs in their careers, right? You only have one career, but you can have multiple
Exactly.
jobs. So just following that passion,
Exactly.
right? And it sounds like that's something that you've done.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly how I feel.
So for you, what's next? Like, what is exciting you at this moment? Like, tell us a little bit about like kind of like how you're feeling from the standpoint you've made this pivot into somewhere where your interest and passion has been able to collide or meet the crossroads of your previous experience. What would you say is next for you?
I think that, so interestingly, it's something that I'm
Okay,
exploring a
okay,
lot in
okay.
recent days, because I'm at about 2.5 years at
Mhm.
Amazon, and I've learned so much. Like, I've managed a portfolio of brands, I've managed a single brand, I've done go to market, I've done a lot. I think what they say is like at Amazon, a year is like
Mhm,
5 years
mhm.
in
Oh
real
wow.
life. And so you do a
Yeah.
lot in a really short amount of
Mhm.
time, which has its pros and its cons. So we won't get
Yeah.
into that
Yeah.
today.
Okay. Another conversation for another day.
That's another conversation, exactly. But I think that what I'm most excited about is, it kind of ties into the last question about
Mhm.
post, right? Exploring like
Yeah.
what's next. I think that I'm excited to explore. I'm excited to be curious. I'm excited to talk to people, just to see what opportunities are out there, both in and out of fashion. I think that I definitely want to stay within, something that I'm like very passionate about, and kind of finding like my home for the
Mhm.
long term. But I'm excited to explore for a
Yeah.
little bit and kind of, see what's out there, and continue to build my skills as a marketer, because I've really only been, a marketer in consumer products for about two
Yeah.
and a half years.
Yeah.
So
That's dope. That's dope. And lastly, what are some like parting words of wisdom that you would give for folks who want to follow any kind of path similar to what you have done or want to make a pivot into one of the areas that you have mentioned? What are some advice that you would give them?
I would say you don't have to like have everything
Mhm.
figured out, right? Like, you don't have to know exactly what it is that you want to do, but I think that having that time to like go inward and like really ask yourself, like, what is it that makes you happy? What is it that, because ultimately that's what it's about, right? Like, you spend so many hours in at work, and I think doing something that brings you joy is really important. And so taking that time to think through what it is that makes you happy, even if it means that you're kind of delaying your process, that it's going to take a little bit longer, or maybe this, going back to school is going to delay you a little bit, and like you're going to play catch up and things
Mhm.
like that. I think that as long as you put thought into your decision making, and you kind of play out the different
Mhm.
scenarios, then you should be okay. Like, you should feel confident by your decision and be fearless and
There you
courageous.
go. There you go. There you go. Well, there you have it, y'all.
Tying it
There
all
you
back.
have it. There you have it. Leslie, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Hatu. This is awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you all for tuning in. Please remember to like and subscribe for more. Most importantly, pivot powerfully. Be well, everyone.